All right, so people are still coming in because I see them coming up the stairs. I'm sort of blocked in by this. But you, okay, if we have an interpanel competition now, you all win because you were even faster than Kostas's panel. So congratulations on the level of organization and punctuality, which I'm sure the people who are watching on Zoom will appreciate, by the way, because they are following along on the original schedule and not the sort of extended schedule we've taken for us. So Vim has, I think for many social scientists here, one of the most interesting panels, which is the panel on foresight and scientific policy innovations. I say this because so many of us who are looking at the intersecting qualities of simultaneous crises are constantly wondering what kind of tools, what kind of data, what kind of functionality do we need to kind of get ahead of things so that everything we do in using sensors, in using different technologies allow us to get ahead of the wave. So Wim and his wonderful panel will look at that, will hopefully give us some inspirational tools as well. Do you want to introduce your panelists? Yes. You will? He has slides on each and every one of them, which I find incredibly impressive. So Wim, thank you, and over to you.
Thank you, Catherine. Thanks and welcome here to this panel on foresight and scientific and policy innovations. We've discussed this. Actually, the panel feels that it also should get an award for diversity, and the fact that Dino is here in the center as the youngest generation. But we've discussed, we do want to take time for interaction with the audience, for questions, remarks, and etc. So we've decided that after a short introduction that I will give about the panel and a few of the issues that came up when I looked at the panel composition, that then the panelists will all give their presentations, which I will limit to 8 minutes max. I will time it with my phone and warn them if they tend to go over time, so that we do have time for interactions with you. So without further ado, let me just show you the panel members, and I will not do it in the order in which they appear. Our first panel member is Pascale Braconneau. She's a professor of climate change in the Institut Pierre-Simon Laplace in France. She has a long career in modeling the Earth's response to multiple anthropogenic interactions, and in particular on the role of the particular of past climates to better understand the role of climate feedback. And Pascale has also been involved in the IPCC 4th and 5th assessment reports. Then Frank Evert is an agricultural scientist that touches back on the discussion we just had before the lunch. He has experience in crop science, production ecology, systems analysis, plant growth, etc., and in particular on what that means for sustainability and the influence on climate change. Then Örjan, next to me, is a professor of geochemistry at the University of Stockholm, and his fundamental interest is to understand how human activities are perturbing the climate, so a bit related to what Pascale is doing, and in particular on the biogeochemical cycle of carbon in the global land-ocean atmosphere. And he has had a long interest in actually reaching out, building collaborations, etc., also outside science. Then we have Inge Jonckheere. She is the head of Green Solutions Division of ESA, European Space Agency. And in particular, oh, sorry, I forgot to show her. So take your time to look at Inge's picture. She is indeed the head of the Green Solutions Division, in particular on Earth observation and climate change. So very relevant for us, also for what you can say about crops, etc. And interestingly, before that, she worked in Rome on the forest and climate team of the FAO. And so Earth observations from space and food come together with Inge. Interestingly also that in her portfolio is actually not so much Europe, but Africa, Asia, and South America. So if you're from outside Europe, you can also talk to Inge about your questions. Then Eleni Zika just arrived today from the ERC. She's the head of sector for scientific impact and feedback to policy. And so she is advising the ERC on the science policy and the impacts. In particular, she's promoting the development of sustainable circular bioeconomy in Europe. So quite relevant, and we'll actually have room to discuss about how we engage in science and how we promote science and what the ERC could do in supporting that. And then finally, last but not least, we have Dino Žujić, who is at the University of Zagreb. He's in his final year as studying medicine. And some of you may already have seen him. He's one of these people from the International Federation of Medical Students. And Dino is indeed, thanks for that. I like this participative audience. If I make a mistake, they correct me. So Dino is actually the program coordinator for mental health, and so he will certainly touch on that issue. But actually, if you're in Zagreb, you're likely to get in touch with Dino because he's also the president of the student council and a member of the mental health committee of the university. So for that, the introduction to the panel, you now know what to expect roughly, and you can already think a little bit about certain questions you might want to talk to or ask to some of the panelists. Now, as I said, I made a few slides just to not to give statements, but actually to bring up some issues. I think no one in this room will doubt that we have a climate change problem, but issues that we could talk to some of the panelists about is the accuracy of the climate predictions. In particular, we've seen in the last few years the unpredictability of extreme heat events. I learned the word heat dome in the last few years. I didn't know about that. You've seen probably some of these pictures that I'm showing that the seawater temperature has been rising unpredictably and out of the normal in the last few years. And just this very week in the Netherlands, there was a group that has been working on the Gulf Stream, the AMOC, for a long time, that is now claiming that there are stronger and stronger indications that if we don't take action, if we don't reduce the CO2 emissions, we might reach a tipping point for the Gulf Stream in 2060, and that would have enormous effects on the temperatures in Europe and on agriculture. Then, in terms of agriculture, you've seen Frank is on the panel. Climate resistance, better balance with biodiversity, an issue that also Louise Fett brought up in the previous panel. I'm showing here the cover of a report that we wrote with ESEC. Those of you who were here before yesterday know that I'm presiding ESEC, the organization of European academies that is giving science for policy advice in areas of environment and energy and public health. And a few years ago, we published this report on regenerative agriculture, inspired by the possibilities to reduce the use of pesticides, the CO2 emissions, etc. So I'm eager to hear about some of these issues discussed by the panel. And I would like to stress and come back to an issue. I'm a colleague of Louise Fett, and if you heard her talk in the previous session, you know that you cannot be not affected by her inspiration. So I'm showing two slides of her. Louise is always stressing that we should not wait for the crisis to happen, especially if you're talking about involving local communities, etc., which is the stick, like we tell them things will go wrong. Let's try to use the carrot, and let's try to entice people, including farmers, local communities, that we have ways of making agriculture more sustainable and improve even the profits of the farmers. And Louise also mentioned this Dutch Delta Plan that I think that basically Louise took the initiative of, which is really a bottom-up initiative of a few years ago, started by the ecologist, where she reached out to many NGOs, local communities, insurances, etc., and that is now really strongly committed to changing the wrong direction that our biodiversity in the Netherlands is going into. So there are plenty of opportunities also for scientists to take action at a local level. Now, getting back to a few of these issues, food security already came up before in these sessions in a changing climate, and of course their resistance of crops. And Haynes mentioned, of course, the fact that if the climate is changing, we get more infections, not only humans, but also we get the crops can be more affected by things that can happen, that new species come in. But of course also space observation, and this brings us back to Inge's expertise, is important for this. There's an issue that I do want to mention that was not mentioned at all so far. Next week with ESEC, we will publish a report on meat alternatives. Not just, and we were discussing in the previous session, reduce the amount of meat we take in, but there's another option, that is that we have cultivated meat, or that we use insecticides and eat those. And this report, which is really very actual and recent, is going to be published and actually shows very clearly where the possibilities are, what we should aim for, but also what the the difficulties are in some cases. And again, here I think there is a whole societal issue. If you want to change people to take different diet, then you have to change the society. We have climate scientists on the panel. I've been worrying about, say, it's clear, I think, that we cannot innovate ourselves out of the climate problem and the CO2 emissions. But nevertheless, the IPCC is counting on some of the negative emission technologies taking CO2 out of the air in some of their scenarios. And I'm eager to hear what the possibilities for that are, because we at ESEC warned for the high cost and the too high expectations in many cases. So then finally, we also have Elena on the panel. And that means that I think it's also useful to see what science can do and how we can change the way we're working. And I would like to draw here attention to another Dutch initiative, and we have the director here on one of the front rows on what is called the KIN in Dutch. It's the Climate Initiative Netherlands, essentially, where the scientists come together to really change it's basically part of the societal change and part of the way we do science, rather than doing all the applications in competition, as is normally the case in the IRC. This climate initiative is also taking action to more work together jointly. So that is an issue that we could also come up with the panel. And finally, then bringing back to Dino with his background in health. Of course, climate change and health has been discussed before, but I thought I would show again here ESEC has been involved actually in Andy Haynes, who presided the session this morning, was the chair of the working group that wrote the report on the right of ESEC, and we've actually taken that globally. We wrote a report together with the colleagues in Asia and the Americas and Africa. And then on the left, I just copied the front page of a book that I wrote, that I read with a lot of interest, The Ministry of the Future. It's a novel, and it's about climate change and how at some point the countries have decided to have a ministry for the future that would be important for climate change and monitoring and making sure that we will take action. So maybe that's also an inspiration for us here. So that's my introduction. I'll leave it at that. And I would say right away we'll go to the panelists. So let me now hand over the pointer to Arjen and ask Arjen to give his contribution.
Thank you very much, Wim, and thank you, the main organizers behind this summit, and everyone for joining. We're going to talk about climate overshoot. Get used to the term. We're going to have to find ways to survive and thrive through climate overshoot for the better part of this remaining century. What does it mean, climate overshoot? On the policy side, it means overshooting or missing the Paris climate targets. It corresponds to crossing the scientific and natural thresholds and limits in the climate and Earth's system. That may undermine the thriving livability across the globe, and especially for the most vulnerable. So we, humanity, we have to walk our talk. I think, though, that talking and communication is essential, especially across traditional sector borders. We're going to have to find unity and common ground, also with traditional adversaries, both across sectors and between nations, to contribute to the mass solution. So in talking about communications, have you noticed that they're talking about 1.5 degrees is getting much more quiet? Why? Let's be sober about it and communicate clearly. 1.5 degrees Celsius has been crossed. We hear sometimes 1.2 or 1.3. That is in the context of the traditional metric in climatology that IPCC is using, with a 30-year running average of temperature. When that long-term statistical average finally passes 1.5, it's far too late. several years now, we have had 1.5 degrees globally. In Austria, I understand it's close to 3 degrees. So we have no time, Ingmar. So as climate scientist, I will follow the example of the good Cardinal Turkson and share some science slides on climate overshoot. I'm going to start with these very familiar slides on CO2 and methane in the atmosphere. So let's face it, our 2 generations have waited too long to start bending the curve of climate change. The climate science can obviously not by itself present solutions, yet science is central. We want fact-based, informed, wise decisions. One thing that science does, it provides reference points. The proof is in the pudding for the effectiveness of our collective mitigation efforts. So we ask the question, what is the effect on greenhouse gas emissions in the atmosphere of all our well-intended collective actions integrated across the globe? Well, that's what you see in these 2 slides. So far, we're not bending the curve of CO2 nor methane. We looked at these plots for so long that we don't even see them any longer. But look at the CO2 curve to the left, the iconical curve of Charles and Ralph Keeling from Mauna Loa on Hawaii. It's overshooting. The natural range is 180 to 280 ppm between glacial periods and warm periods. We're well above 400 now. And it keeps going on with the constant rate of 40 billion tons per year that we add to the atmosphere. On the right-hand side, we have the methane. The 2020s, this decade, was going to be the decade of forceful methane mitigation. The Glasgow COP agreed on the global methane pledge. We would bend the curve of methane emissions 30% down from 2020 to 2030. What we're seeing in reality is that atmospheric methane is soaring. It is overshooting. It is actually already above what is consistent with the 2-degree Paris target, just so you know from science. And we don't really know why it's soaring. It's an area of very intense scientific research. It seems that one reason is that we have really triggered accelerated releases from natural sources, from Mother Earth herself. So increasing releases of methane from tropical wetlands, from boreal wetlands, from thawing permafrost, and what have you. Okay, on the left here is some conceptual pictures of climate overshoot, just for us to ponder a little bit about. So you are going to hear people saying, but what about if we only temporarily climate overshoot, and then we bend the curve and bring it down? What's the problem? Don't be fooled by such a reason to delay action. There is no more time to wait. We have to keep pushing forward. If you look at the bottom left curve there on looking at emissions, look at the bottom line first. So if we actually bent the curve a few years ago and forcefully decreased emissions by, say, 5% per year or so, there was a small chance that we could get down to net zero emissions, which would have been the only way to reach the climate target, 1.5, or this could equally well soon be 2 degrees, this cartoon. Now, what it illustrates, if you look at the second line, if you just wait a few years, and then you peak the emissions, and then you bring it down at a very high rate to net zero emissions, we're still going to have climate overshoot. If you look at the top graph, the middle line, it will overshoot, and it will have effects on Earth system thresholds and the livability of the planet. If we waited just for a few more years, the top line at the bottom there, get a higher peak, we decrease at an enormous rate, and then what we'll see is we have to go into deep negative emission space. And here it will be, there's a large questions of feasibility of that. It's hugely costly, and the capturing mechanisms are not demonstrated at scale. And we will pass irreversible thresholds in the Earth system in many ways. I will finalize with this, that the mass journey through climate overshoot is going to be a tortuous path. But we're going to bend these curves. We shall bend these curves. We have to do both a sprint and a marathon. We have to rapidly decrease emissions now with short-lived climate pollutants, and then have the stamina to do it long term. We have to adapt while we do that, because we're having overshoot and effects. We have to think about the vulnerable persons. So we have to mitigate, adapt, and we have to do carbon capture. And I think what it takes is a system shift. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thanks a lot, Orion. Inge, what are the most significant advances in Earth observation over the past decade that have supported climate and conservation-informed decision-making? And what scientific and technological gaps remain urgent to address?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So first of all, also, I'm very pleased to be here. So thanks for the organizers for this great initiative, because as I was saying to this panel before, very often we speak into our little niches in our groups, but very rarely we're all mixed together like here. And so this is why also very much in favor of a lot of discussion and dialogue also with the youth about all this. So as Wim announced before, in my former professional life, I was working for the UN, for the FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization, traveling the world, helping developing countries, setting up satellite systems, mainly to really monitor their natural resources. Because as you know, if we cannot monitor or measure, we don't know what's there. And this summit is about Europe, as Wim rightly said, but so we also in Europe have a big role in the development and the sustainable development with partners, and especially with developing countries. So this is something which has not been tackled so much in this meeting, so I think it's important to mention. So in the last year, so I joined ESA. I hope you all know what ESA is. If you talk to a 5-year-old, they know what NASA is, but they have no clue what ESA is. So sometimes I say it's the European NASA, which is a bit controversial, but so it's a European Space Agency. So we're a research science management organization. We're European, as the name it says, but we also have Switzerland. So it's not only the European Commission part. And basically what we want to do is scientific exploitation of satellite data for peaceful purposes. Peaceful, very important in this geopolitical context as we live in now. So ESA has 8 establishments all over Europe. I don't want to make this promotion for ESA, but I realize that people really don't know what they do. It's true that maybe some of you know the astronauts. There's also an Austrian astronaut, so this is the big part. But ESA does a lot more and can also change a lot of impact in your daily life. So we use satellite data. ESA has their own satellites, and I think recently the launch of new satellites gets a bit more attention than before. So there were a few successful launches. And I think the reason also why these launches get more and more into the picture is because, as you all know, overseas, it's a bit difficult to be a scientist now in US, and it also goes back for NASA. So if we see what the budget's promises will be for NASA upcoming, is that basically they go back to the budget in the 1960s, without inflation correction, of course, which means that there's 2 ways for Europe to act. And given this is a European summit, I think this is a very big point, and I would love to hear also the view of the youth in this. It's basically that Europe can just sit back and relax and see, well, whatever, but we can also stand up and take the gap. For this, we need, of course, a unite Europe, we need to end the fragmentation, and we have to look all into the same direction. And this is something which, from my view so far, we really have to push for this, and I think we really should go there. Because first of all, science is at stake, and so very nice we had the whole part you mentioned, because ESA, as said before, scientific excellence is the basis. We don't do the science ourselves, we count on people like you, like academia, but also industry, to really boost, based on scientific excellence, what can be done for the climate change. So you were asking what happened in the last decades. I think all of you have seen a satellite, or all of you have seen at least the NASA counterparts, because I have to admit some of the images of the landing of these starships, it's really impressive. So I think people are more connected now to space. Like when I did my PhD in space science 25 years ago, which looks an eternity, but it's not that long ago, I did a PhD on one image, which was super expensive. Well, now, as you all can see, you all have a smartphone, you have Google Maps, you have all these tools on it, so it's open data, because since 2011, the Landsat, so the NASA, made all satellite data open. So it means that the general public can use it. And sequently, also Europe did this. So we heard in some talks yesterday about open data. So I really can say that this is something Europe is really fully in. So together with the Commission, we have the Copernicus program. So it's this group of satellites which are, I won't go into the detail, but you have scientific satellites, but you also have meteorological satellites, which really give you just a weather forecast, which everybody of you uses for 1,000 of applications, but can also be very helpful in, for example, in agriculture, which we're going to discuss later. For example, to help farmers to have a better yield production. So in that sense, the tools of the satellites, which for a lot of people is very abstract, can be a real asset in daily life. And so this is exactly what I'm doing in ESA. So as written there, I'm the head of the Green Solutions Division. Not to be confused with the fact that I'm the sustainability officer for ESA. I'm also very much into this, how we can, as you were saying, Wim, on an individual level, I think we really have to walk the walk, because we're the climate scientists. We know exactly what's happening, as you showed. And if we don't do this, I mean, how can then we ask for the general public to really stand up and change behavior? So I think it really starts there. And so this is something at heart, but this is not my role in ESA. So we really use satellite data in, so the satellite whatever, in order to make a product to boost European industry, because that's also some of our mandates, together with the Commission, who really looks a lot now to competitiveness, and this is something I want to show. So it also go back to discussions I think we had in the hallways here, not so much into the discussions on stage, is that climate change and the narrative does not sell. I'm from Belgium. I'm very much in the Belgian press, and as soon as I talk about climate change, I'm a communistic bitch, and I should shut up. I think climate change has nothing to do with right or left, but for some reason it got so polarized, and it's in the left wing, and that's where it is. So one of my last descriptions now is that we should get out of it, and there's so much opportunities economically also to get from there. So in that sense, we really have to change the narrative, and I think for that also the climate scientists, we do have that responsibility to do so. So the same for ESA, so we use climate change, but it's true that through the member states, ESA gets money. There's a geo-return, so that's the very nice principle for all of you being in Europe, that the money that your country gives to ESA should go for at least 85% to the academia and to the industry in the country. So basically, there's a lot of opportunities, and I think what's needed now for the climate resilience is that the tools are there. There's options to do better science, to know better what's out there, and also to boost industries based on what's possible in order to make it a better planet.
Wonderful. Thank you, Inge. We'll then move to Dino. Dino, how can youth-led organizations, particularly in the health sector, drive societal transformation towards climate resilience, ensuring that health equity and intergenerational justice are at the core of mitigation and adaptation strategies? Go ahead.
Wow, okay, it's already on. Thank you so much for the question, and thank you so much to the WHO Youth Council that brought all of our amazing youth organizations together. I'm representing the International Federation of Medical Students Associations, and I'm saying this because it's a really unique association that is actually spread out through 5 regions and over 135 countries. So when I will be sharing some thoughts, have that in mind, that it's not just me, but a youth from all over the world Europe, but also other regions that we are working with daily. And thank you so much, Wim, for the great introduction. I think I need to upload my LinkedIn because I'm no longer a student. I am a freshly graduated medical doctor, and I'm not saying this to brag. Thank you so much. My mom will be proud. I'm not saying this to brag. I'm saying this to start with the sentence that I'm scared. I come from Croatia, which is a really beautiful country. If you haven't visited, then you should. But we have so many beautiful landscapes and islands, but we don't have any climate-related knowledge. And I don't think it's just unique for my country, but I believe that all of Europe has more or less the same problem. So as a medical doctor, now me and all of my colleagues, we cannot afford to not care about climate anymore. So it's not about how to treat stomach pain or how to treat, I don't know, any other condition. Now we are put in a situation that we never asked for as youth, as children, you know, that now we have to care about all these other things because we inherited a planet that is struggling, basically. So because I am the last youth panelist and the summit is coming to an end, I will not respond directly to this comment, but I have been taking some notes throughout these 2 days, just some things that I want to share with the older generation, sort of, and maybe leave it as a food for thought. And I will actually build up what Inge said about the left and right. And I'm actually going to put a perspective on youth and how we view the Vatican and church, because you know, oftentimes like youth is considered like more liberal. We are, you know, more shifting towards this direction, and then there is a misconception that the Vatican and the church are not admitting that we have a problem like this. You know, youth is not aware that that the Vatican is understanding and recognizing this issue. And I have been discussing with my colleagues that summits like these are crucial because there's no more, you know, our values, our, you know, it's not important. There's only one who is fighting against climate change, and it's humanity. It's not the left or the right or the church or the not. We are all in this together, and it's important to spread the word about summits like this for the youth to actually be familiar with, okay, we have support from all different stakeholders because we are all recognizing this issue. And because we are in Vienna, there is a really interesting story from this city. I don't know if you are aware or not, but in 2023, there was a lawsuit. It was 13 kids from 6 to 12 years old who actually filed a lawsuit against the government because they said, okay, so in the Constitution and in like basic children right is for a child to be able to thrive and to have its best interest at heart. And they said, okay, well, my government is not really taking action against climate change and to protect the planet, so indirectly they are actually you know, not doing anything to work in our best interest. So they filed a lawsuit, and this was really interesting being here in Vienna, and it also takes me to my next point, that the youth and young people are getting more and more angry, which is good because like we can turn this anger into productivity, but there is a clear gap. And I really appreciate the organizers of this summit for including the youth and letting us sit at every panel. But it's more than that. Like my message to all of the older generations that we look up to, you are our mentors, you are someone that we actually aspire to become like one day, if you did your job right. You have a great pool of young people from all of the different sectors. You have the health youth, you have the food youth, you know, I call it like this. So what is preventing any of us to actually engage in a conversation after the summit or in the breaks, actually engage and make the youth feel like, okay, maybe I can learn something from you, because the first step is to admit we can learn from each other. It's not just us learning from you or the other way around. So some of other things that I wanted to share, give me 1 second, is, basically when we say Europe, we always think that we are this region that is sort of, and we are privileged in so many ways, but Europe is not just, it's not unified as we heard today. Europe is very polarized, from very developed countries to countries that are struggling and that are living worse than a lot of other countries that we think are below Europe when it comes to life standards. So we should actually be aware of our privilege. Like, it is a privilege that we can sit here and discuss together when many of others cannot. So we should do our best to include the voices of those who are underrepresented and actually learn from them when we are talking about climate. Of course, if we come from a very developed countries, we should contribute to climate issues. But if we haven't felt it that much, we should at least, consult the ones that actually felt the consequences. So this will be also my message to this summit. It's also really important to know that we will have children, we will have grandchildren. Will they be able to live on this planet with the quality of life that we have been given? Not really. I'm not going to go into any science, but I'm just going to leave you to think about this, because it's not just how you are going to go, or me or anyone, but we should also think of every other generation that is going to come. So I'm going to finish now and just read one poem that is really short, don't worry, that I really love. It's a poem by Drew Dillinger. It's called It's 3:33 in the morning. So it goes like this. It's 3:23 in the morning and I am awake because my great-grandchildren won't let me sleep. My great-great-grandchildren ask me in dreams, what did you do while the planet was plundered? What did you do when the earth was unraveling? Surely you did something when the seasons started failing, as the mammals, reptiles, birds were all dying. Did you fill the streets with protest when democracy was stolen? What did you do once you knew? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dino, for bringing it up various important points and indeed stressing the urgency to take action also in many ways. And indeed, I took your CV from LinkedIn. I'm sorry for that. Eleni, in what ways can frontier science help catalyze the deep societal transformations required for climate resilience, not just through technological innovations, but by reshaping narratives, values, and our understanding of interdependence with the Earth system? Go ahead.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone, and I'd like also to extend my warm thanks to the organizers for the kind invitation, and also to express the fact that I'm very positively impressed by the young generation representatives that I see here today. It makes us feel very hopeful, and also very old and unaccomplished following Dino's intervention, so I'll try to do my best. I'll try to talk to you a little bit about as well how frontier science, which is what my organization supports through research funding, can actually inform evidence-based policy making so that we can actually accomplish this transformation we're all speaking about, and it is so fundamental for our survival really as a species. So I'd like to start with a quote from Professor Harriet Bulkley, who is a geographer and a member of the European Research Council, Scientific Council, who said very recently that frontier science, which is what we support as a funder, is helping us to understand not only the challenges we face in tackling the climate and nature crisis, but also opens new forward-looking perspectives on how governments, businesses, and communities come together with individuals and already create solutions which are very tangible. And I think this captures the essence of what we mean by using frontier science and embedding it into policy thinking and design, and using that precisely to tackle the challenges at hand. So the idea is to move beyond just the generation of knowledge or considering science as a passive diagnosis of problems that we're trying to solve, but really as a generator of very concrete and actionable pathways for transformation. So for those of you who don't know what frontier science means for us, it's curiosity-driven science that is selected on the basis of excellence only and not on the basis of political priority. So it's entirely bottom-up, and we have been funding such science, more than 17,000 projects as of today, since 2007 non-stop. My team works in looking at how we can actually extrapolate results from the science that we fund and make that more understandable, but also communicate more clearly towards policymakers. And we recently published a study that is called Transformative Change for Sustainable Future, just by looking at the portfolio of the ERC within this domain that largely is represented by social sciences and humanities. And we really wanted to focus on that aspect because we know technological solutions are available but are often not taken up. We wish to understand why that was. So we reviewed actually research projects that we funded that deal with climate sustainability and justice, and one of the clearest messages that came out of that analysis was that transformation is not just a single technological breakthrough that we need to implement. It is a proper systemic shift that requires crossing multiple leverage points across governance and fiscal systems, change behaviors. In fact, we heard about diet shifts earlier today, understanding ecosystems and bridging them better, and of course, not forgetting equity and justice. I think this is really important. And what we discovered is that there's already a lot of research undertaken that is not imposed by political priorities, that actually opens up several leverage points, many of which policymakers are simply not aware of. So if you like, what my team is trying to do is to raise awareness precisely about that. There are several examples of projects. This is publicly available online, so I invite you all to have a look at it. I just want to mention a couple just to highlight some of these points. So for instance, a project in Barcelona works with city planners to redesign food, water, and energy flows, and helps really transform, as they say, urban metabolism research into proper climate-resilient city policies that are really actionable. Another project is looking at cooperative biodiversity governance, and is actually engaging directly with local communities. And there, what they've noticed is that when you give local communities co-decision powers, actually, then scientific evidence becomes properly at the heart of the action that is to be implemented. So with all of that, I wanted to illustrate what another member of our council says, that rethinking systems and really achieving transformation, which is very deep and radical, requires justice and equity at its core, and it needs to be really transcending disciplines, borders, and expertise, I would say. So what, in my view, is really crucial is to, for one thing, map that science and make it known in manners which are both accessible but also robust and rigorous, and we know that this is possible. I mean, the IPCC process is a proper example of that, and how we can transform science that is curiosity-driven, applied, what have you, into insights that are properly actionable and informing policy. But I think another important aspect, and because you are speaking about a call for action, it is really about the co-creation and the idea of bringing communities together, not only scientists and policymakers, but actors from the civil society, young, the generation, industry, I think is very important to have on board as well. So I think this is really, really crucial, this notion of participation from all walks of life to make this happen. And thirdly, I just wanted to say, and I was very pleased that Inge referred to this, I think it's very important to enable this kind of innovation to properly scale up some of this work. So of course we need to be thinking about behavioral shifts, but also we need to be thinking about how we can support this financially in a long-term manner. With also open science, I think this is very, very crucial. I think we can be proud in Europe that we are really leading in this sphere. And I would like to close by circling back to Harriet's point earlier on, in that frontier research, which we support very proudly with the ERC, not only helps us understand crisis, but it really reveals new ways forward. So I think perhaps I'm preaching to the choir here, but I think if we really want climate change and climate mitigation rather than adaptation at large scale, and at the speed that you spoke about earlier on is so urgent, then we must be ready to recognize and act on these scientific insights. And with that, I'll stop, and I will thank you very, very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. So we'll move on to Frank, and yeah, you have the PowerPoint clicker. So how to co-design climate resilient solutions together with practitioners, researchers, policymakers, and relevant part of society. Frank.
Thank you, Wim, for the introduction and also for the question, and thanks the organizers for having me here. It's a great pleasure to be here and absorb all the information that's being conveyed. Originally, I was inclined to tell you something about the work that we do in impact assessment and alerting you about the results that we get and also the improvements that we have in our models and also quantifying uncertainties of these models improvements that have been made there. But then I thought that community does not really need to be alerted anymore. There is already awareness enough around. Let's perhaps talk a bit more of how we can, from a scientific point of view, advance with respect to the impact that we have with our result on the ground, not in the science. We have great impact of our results in the scientific community, but when it comes to practical solutions, there is still quite a gap. And I want to follow up on a comment that was made by Louise Fett. She said climate change is not the only thing that people worry, and that's pretty much true in the agricultural and agri-food domain. Climate change is just one driver that farmers have to respond to, politicians have to respond to daily. There are market volatilities, there is new technologies coming in, we get conflicts, wars, impact on trade, etc. So there are many factors that come into play, and the system has to respond to that. And maybe that is, we provide answers from a scientific point of view to parts of the question, but they hardly integrate on the ground so that you come to workable solutions for farmers. And I want to illustrate that a little more with one example that has also been mentioned several times here, that is diversification. We think diversification is a great mean in order to improve resilience, and that's an example from some of the results we've looked into the most five driest years in the last 30 years, showing the impact of the drought and heat for crops. That's in Germany, and the more reddish the color is, the more severe is the yield failure. And what you see is that the yield failures, spatial distribution, varies depending on the year. So drought is not drought in every year, it's not the same, and depending on the crop. So that makes it difficult to come with one solution for each crop and for the year. But it also is good news because diversification could be a mean to adjust to those impacts, in that case, one factor, drought, to respond to that. And there are other co-benefits of diversification with respect to pest and disease control, water quality and soil quality when it comes to mitigation. We know about that, we've reported about that many times, but farmers hardly pick up on that. Why is that? We know the food chain is quite bigger. There are other aspects related to that. Now, we refer to that, it's only one innovation that we think is important here. We refer to that as the innovation gap, which really prohibits the diffusion of our scientific knowledge into practice to really come to solutions. And there are a number of challenges. On the one hand, we need to provide urgent information in transformation. We've mentioned that several times, but there are multiple goals. There are many stakeholders involved. They all play a role. And the processes that are to be changed, they are slowly changing. So there's not an immediate success. They're not great success stories in the short term, but you have to get started somewhere. There are regional characteristics. They're all different. That makes it difficult to come with generalized solution, and still there's a link to the global level. And there's a great dynamic. So these farms and policymakers have to adapt continuously. Every week, every month, there's a new situation for them. Now, in order to overcome that, we proposed a new research mode that we embedded in an institutional framework that we call an innovation center for agriculture systems transformation, to really have a long-term institutional structure to work on those type of questions, to develop timely solutions, have a systematic scope, have a transdisciplinary approach, be adaptive, and also be regional. Now, what does it mean more concretely? We have, for instance, one more comment in order to illustrate the key, let's say, innovation of that of this new center. Central to the center is to work in what we call living labs. Living labs are experimental geographic spaces. They are regional transformation zone for resilient, sustainable agri-food systems. They provide the governance for transformation, and important here is the research with actors. It's not that we as researchers ask the question, we come to an answer and convey the answer. We ask the question together with the actors in the first place. That's a major difference. And through that, we really hope to advance and contribute much better from a scientific point of view through engaging with the actor in what we call a co-design approach. Now, practically, we have started that in the area where I work with farmers to design a diversified system in order to test and see to which extent the diversification of crops within a landscape would really have a climate change, resilience impact, but also benefits for other services that of interest. We have combined that here with other innovations. You just saw the robots with digitalization, because that's another aspect. There are different innovations ongoing, and these innovations have to match and meet at the farming level. So that's unfortunately in German, but we also look into agri-photovoltaics, into agroforestry system, into value chains, into a system to incentivize certain activities. So it's a combination of innovations that are part of a living lab context with which we work with actors in the respective regions. And we do that in different parts because we think regions are different, contexts are different, innovations in the individual regions are different. There are aspects to generalize, but there are also region-specific components. In Germany we do that, and we also sort of link up with activities at the European level. To summarize, we think that the living lab approach with the co-design in its heart, involving relevant actors, building capacity in respective networks with the respective new methods and infrastructure, could be a game changer in terms of building sustainability and resilience through change. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Frank. Before moving to Pascal, let me just mention, I think we'll have 10 minutes for discussion afterwards, so you can start preparing your questions. But first of all, our last panelist, Pascal, are climate projections sufficient to understand and anticipate how climate changes and extremes are affecting climate resilience in Europe? Go ahead.
Okay, like the others, I would like first to thank for the invitation to be part of this meeting and to be part of this panel. And this question is, for me, something important because we are thinking about projections. So what is the story we will have in the future for humanity and for our climate? And for me, I would like first to precise what I call the projections, because I'm part of these people who are developing these big models, what you call climate model or Earth system models, that couples the meteorology in the atmosphere, all the movements in the ocean, the land surface, and the cryosphere in different manners. And in the last year, what has happened, and all this is going very fast for the community, you have to realize that all this progress is that we're also able to not only consider the climate itself, but its connection with the other cycle, and in particular the carbon cycles and the others that are feeding in the system. And then what is important with these projections, they started in the 1790s by thinking about the carbon, the big things, and how the carbon is impacting climate and what we should do out of it. And already with different ways of impacting the climate, different types of scenario, low level or higher level. And this has fed the IPCC reports in the beginning. So now you're speaking about the scenario, or even the result I've seen, the thinking you have these results in mind with different steps, of course, we've made. And the other aspects in that is that for several years already, the community thinks as we were early warning actors with this simulation and how we present our results. And little by little, we understand that we are also provider of solutions. And it's something that is not that easy to reconcile when you want to continue to understand the system, how it works, and with curiosity-driven, or lots of things we still do not understand. And another way to reconcile this with other needs from other communities, where also there is some curiosity-driven things, and it's still very important to have it to move on, and how we can do all the subjects together only with a bunch of simulation where you incorporate all your knowledge in. So that's the part for the simulation. And these projections, most of the results we've heard are there for a long time. And climatists like me say, oh yes, but we are very lucky because compared to our ancestors, we have the biggest tool we can use, producing lots of results. And finally, the way we use them is still very poor. And is it a problem of communication? Is it because we have too much communicate only on temperature, because we have also to defend ourselves on deniers, to prove that indeed human activity is affecting climate? And how can we get to the next level in the debate so that all this can be really used to go faster and to feed all the activities, and also to be able to feed all the connections with biodiversity, with the water, with the resources, and how we can move the different sector of activities into something that is more resilient. So for this, Europe is in good position because we have lots of modeling groups, we have computing, and we are very well connected with international communities. And I have to say also that all these simulations that are produced are discussed at the international level as part of the World Climate Research Program. And everything, we have built a huge infrastructure with years where Europe is also playing a big role. And everything is accessible for free. And I would like to say also that for years, we also have not only the temperature, of course, the hydrological cycle and several things, and also lots of results about the extremes. And I look back at some of my early presentation, and it's a long time from the IPCC report. I'm using some figure for the Mediterranean basin, where you can try to explain to people that we have to imagine something where we will have a drying somehow, but also lots of floodings. And that we will have something where the extremes will not necessarily evolve as the mean climate. Exactly the same region affecting, and so on. And finally, in the last IPCC report, there's been a lot on extremes, and also from these results, with other results, explaining us how this extreme will change or might change depending if you are in the Northern Europe, in Eastern Europe, and so on. And then I really invite you to look at all this. It does not tell you at your region exactly, but it tells you already a lot what you might face in the future. We're already facing it. It's increasing, and how it will move in the future. So this to say that we are speaking about resilience in Europe, and those results only what is available already tells us that we have to make sure we discuss the resilience with this in mind, with the specificity in the different regions, in the different sectors. We already seen this in the discussion. I really would like that we emphasize this much more. And it's important because we also know we are discussing the financial part, but also the policy part. And we know that we need to have measured one step to move on, so that we have trajectories with policies. And this is important that these policies does not try to make the same thing everywhere in Europe, but that this diversity is on board, and that what is important, and that we have mitigation adaptations together with this transition. And what you can do depends really on the place you are, and the difficulties you might have, and how vulnerable you are to different events. The other point I would like to say is that, of course, there's a lot waiting for you, but we underestimate most of the time that even if all of this is available, you can address so many questions that is really a technical thing for each of the sectors. That means also we are telling this for years that we need new people at the interface. We need translators, but it's new people, and the new generation is doing it for somehow. We absolutely need to encourage that. It's not this or that, it has been said already, right? It's how we build this together. It's also not only a technical problem in terms of engineers. It's also a question of how we interact together and put the right questions in between people. And this also, there is some alert from the young community in our domain, because it's a huge work to deal with all this data. It's very difficult, it's technical, and some of them are in a postdoc position, and suddenly they have to spend 1 year only trying to figure out how they get rid out of this data, because this part is underestimated. And it's underestimated not only because it's difficult, it will remain difficult because what we are doing is difficult, but people will improve, we can still improve our system to facilitate that. But it means also that the way we phrase our questions in between communities, the way we interact, and the way we minimize the work to be done to have the best answer for our questions is also a scientific one we should not underestimate. So maybe I stop this.
Yeah. Thank you, Pascal, and thanks to all the members of the panel for their introductions. Okay, so there is indeed time for discussion. I see, let's take 3 questions. I see one here, there's one in the back, and I'm sure we'll get more. Let's start here.
Thank you. Thank you to the whole panel. I suppose one word that didn't come up today significantly was security. And given the first presentation, one of the things that I'm slightly worried about is we seem to have a very conservative approach to science, preserving the present. And I would say what the science is telling us is that the present is no longer viable. Our economic system is not viable. Actually, we've pretty much lost the climate to which the economic system sits. And we are operating in a new unknown. And in that context, the future looks radically different. So the work we're seeing is how do you stabilize glaciers to preserve long-term water management of Europe, which becomes a critical issue if we're going to have predictable water systems. We're doing work with one environmental agency to talk about how do you build a hydrological trust, which is managing upstream and downstream, cloud seeding and everything else as an integrated live system. So the question I have is that it feels like a lot of our conversation still seems rooted, I would say nearly 5 years to where the practice and the questions are in governments and in policymakers, because they're already moving in a different landscape. And I wonder what that gap is and what the innovation gap really is for science relative to actually the questions that are being asked in a security threshold conversation around the world already.
Okay, thank you. We'll certainly take that question. There was one on the back, yeah?
Uli Pöschl from the Max Planck Institute for Chemistry. First of all, thanks to all of you for really nice forward-looking presentations. I have a comment and question following up in particular on Inge and Dino, but maybe also Louise from the morning. So the way I take it in these discussions usually is to think that the term Anthropocene is a way of framing the entire issue we are dealing with, both the climate change challenges, but also the biodiversity challenges and the many opportunities we are having to say, well, we are shaping the planet and not only influencing, but indeed shaping the planet. So let's try to get it right. In my view, that's sort of a more hopeful approach also to the younger generation. And I was wondering how you see this, if you have thought about utilizing this concept also along these lines and how to do that.
Okay, thank you. Louise, you want to add to this very briefly? Can we have, Ned, let's wait for the phone, the mic. And then we'll go to the panel for the discussion, yeah?
Yeah, well, of course, you understand my frustration of not having been able to really talk.
But you're not going to take many
No,
minutes.
absolutely not. No. Actually, yeah, I have a question, and maybe I'd like to respond to that one, but that will come with the drinks or whatever we have.
Okay, go on.
Okay, I'm curious why we never talk about CCU, carbon capture utilization. We haven't heard it at all, this whole conference.
Okay.
And so I hope
Question
some
on
of the experts
CCU.
can say that.
Let's first go to the first question that was asked. Maybe this is also about the science system. So I think, Eleni, you should also try to reflect on this. Do you have a particular person you would like to reflect on? Urian? Urian goes first and then Eleni prepare.
I think navigating the unknown territory ahead with respect to security aspects and other things is an extremely complex challenge that doesn't have a simple answer, and there's no silver bullets, and it's going to be adaptive engineering on our behalf there. But I do want to tie in, while I hold the mic, to the other two questions too. I do think, if I understand Paul Crutzen's Anthropocene correctly, it's not only negative, the anthropogenic perturbations, but it is what we're operating in. And someone else said in the earlier panel before lunch that we like change. And it's a challenge, and there is hope there. And of course, every 0.1 degree less warming we can get makes a huge difference. And we will have to find ways there to have hope. I think there is hope there in that change, and I think we can affect it. And I think it's the positive side of the Anthropocene. And I think there is, losing my thread here a little bit, but my message is that I do think it's not apocalyptic. It's a thing that we can affect. We can affect our future as human beings. And I think there's hope in that.
Okay. Anyone else wants to? Frank?
I think one aspect that we are increasingly becoming aware of is the complexity of the system or systems we are dealing with. And that from a purely science perspective, we are unable really to provide the necessary answer. We can give ideas, we can inject results, but the interaction to the many questions that are coming up and the turnover of challenges are only increasing rather than decreasing, not only the amount but also the turnover. And therefore we think if we get close, if we get into a mode where we are closer to the people and the group of actors that actually have the questions, then our contribution can be more effective. It doesn't exclude the other parts. I think the other type of science is still needed, should still be there, but we need also to engage more with the actors in order to be closer to the problems. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So, yeah?
Maybe I just wanted to follow up on this quickly and to say that at least what we've seen from just as a very small portfolio of 300 projects we analyze is that scientists are in fact already engaging through very specific projects with actors, with specific groups, NGOs, with industry to explore not only what knowledge they can learn from their work, but also actions. I've mentioned just a couple of projects in my intervention very briefly, but we should not forget that I think scientists are more and more active and proactive in engaging with other actors, as you said. But I think it's also very important to let scientists really work on the science without thinking about the different political agendas, because sometimes innovation comes from serendipity. We cannot predict everything. I think we need to find the right balance between prescribing and anticipating.
One quick comment to that. I fully agree with you, and I'm happy that you made the comment that we already have good examples where scientists are engaging, but the process is slow. The process is slow because the science system is not really supporting it. The science system, which is, with its criteria to value science, is still quite conventional, traditional. And a different type of science, I guess, is what we are talking about. We don't have criteria for that. There's very little recognition for that. So it's just starting to develop. I think we are on a good way, but we are just starting, to be honest, is my impression. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think Pascal also would like to contribute. And I do want to give Dino and Inge also a chance to react to... Okay, go ahead.
Maybe also it's a different aspect of the question I would like to tackle. We all have a difficulty, and that's true also for the climate community and with big models and whatsoever. Is the thinking we have in general is really an impact thinking, right? I'm do that in what will happen. More and more we are thinking of the feedback. But these feedback are very difficult to tackle. And each time we have a system with additional feedbacks, we are learning something more. And sometimes we are learning that it's not exactly the same that if this feedback is ignored. And little by little, we are learning about it. So it's true for everything. And in particular, there's more and more with biodiversity in that, more and more environment. And the thinking is there, that it has to be developed. And we have also in between communities to really understand what it means between us. Then for neutrality, I think we can have some hope, and the hope is that we reduce rapidly our emissions, so that's still there. But we also have ethics questions coming in, depending on what we want to do on this planet, because we have heard of solutions. Some are nature-based solutions, others are more industrial solutions, and then it raises additional questions. And even that lots of reluctance about it in the community, and I have to say it, in the climate community, finally people realize they have to grab it to make sure there is good science and the decisions are based on something we understand, with better understanding.
Thank you. Let me invite Dino and Inge to, you were also challenged a little bit by the speaker in the back, so you want to?
Yeah, thanks for your question. It's a question I get often, actually, if I still have hope and I'm still positive on working on all this in the future. Well, I am hopeful. I'm especially hopeful because I do see this young generation also so engaged. So this is where we do it for, to really hand over at least something decent. And then I also really do think that through innovation, we really came a long way forward. And I can give you a space example. Like, for example, you're all very aware, I think, of the EUDR, new regulation on deforestation-free products. So one of the things is that with the technology, so we have space data, we have satellite data, so it's verifiable, it's objective, and so it can be used to really check if these things are in place. So one of the things we do is, together with the Commission, we design, if they design a new law, that we can see that it's measurable, that there's specific tools based on technology and innovation which can really help the implementation to see that it goes the right way. And I think if we go back a long way in time, we didn't have that. So we were all doing things, but we couldn't see the impact of this. So I really do think that the thing that it's, for me, the most crucial and lacking now is exactly, I don't know, I think, Eleni, you told about the translation. And this is why this kind of meetings, not this specifically, but bringing all these stakeholders together is so crucial. Because in our little silos and in our little groups, like Pascal was saying, in the climate group, people are doing excellent jobs, and for ages and forever. But linking these has always been difficult because we don't speak the same language. And I think this panel did quite a great job because we have very different backgrounds. And if you really stick to your technical jargon, no one understands nobody. But I think we're forced now, and this is also linked to the question before, it's another reality. It's not possible that you're a scientist, you're working on your science and you go home. This is not accepted. And this is also why they push climate science to be in the public discourse, to really bring up what you know, because that's what's one of our roles, which has never been the case. When I was studying science, they never had science communication. While I think this is crucial and people should have it, because if you cannot translate what you do, it's very hard to explain to others. And so I think the innovation links, for me, mainly in bringing the different groups together and make sure that best use of everything that has been developed over time. So that's my hope, and meetings like this give hope because we do so, and then bring in the youth, which we should trust, because I really do think that's a great point forward, can really bring this forward. So I give the last word to Dino.
Yeah, Dino has his own mic. I've negotiated 2 extra minutes. And also there's a final comment by Professor Schauenhofer. But first, Dino.
Yeah, just a brief comment. You know, it's not about whether we are positive or negative. You know, if the glass is half full or half empty shouldn't even be in question. The youth cares about the objective facts. Is the planet worse today than it was ever before? Yes. Is it going downhill? Yes. Okay, yes and no. We have a lot of improvements, definitely. That's true. We are hopeful. This is why we are here. But like, just to answer to this question, I don't think it should be, you know, a question of a mindset, but a question of proper action, you know. So that's my comment on that.
Okay, so this session will end with a final comment by Professor Schauenhofer.
Sorry, I apologize to take the liberty, but first of all, I can save us time because I'm on the next panel. I can cover the CCU question, for example. So I'll refer to that. So that's the one thing. The other thing, I was really struck by Frank Ewert and the concept you're developing itself, and it's about complexifying, in a way, land use. Now, I had an amazing experience, and we must not fool ourselves as scientists. So it was a debate organized by the German Ministry for Agriculture about the future of land use, actually. And we had all types of lobbyists in the room, and I also presented something complex: land use, agri-forestry, agri-photovoltaics, you know, all the wonderful things. And when a person got up, it was actually the president of the Farmers Association of Germany, very powerful organization. You can imagine, he was absolutely furious and told me, this scientist wants to make our life even more complex. It's already so complicated. We want to reduce land use. We want to have it as simple as possible. And that's what we're up against. Let's not fool ourselves. The lobbyists out there, we want it as simple as possible, even the world goes down the drain.
Okay, thank you for that comment. And unfortunately, there's no time anymore to respond to this from the panel. Let me thank all the panel members. Let me thank the audience for their contributions. Thanks again.
Thanks to the thoughtful comments of how truthfully and with the tools we have on how to rethink them, how to recombine them, how to reuse them. And I particularly like Pascal's point about asking ourselves whether we're always asking the right questions. And I think it echoes with Eleni's point this morning about, are we not seeing the solutions that exist in the world and how we leverage them, looking to the global south, allowing us a sense of hubris that we always have to have all the knowledge in-house in Europe. That's not the case, and I think this panel illustrated how much we can take away from our recombination of forecasting and scientific strategies and combine that with practical solutions. And that fundamentally is what our last panel is about. We have reached the ST part of our MAST concept in our discussions today, which is societal transformation. And if you will, this panel could just be titled the all hands on deck strategy, or the strategy that we look to establish. And we have a formidable panel here, and I just want to let you know that we will be moving right after this panel into the conclusion, which is to say into the final formation and discussion of our joint call to action, which is to say that you will all leave here with homework. This is the last time you're going to see me on this stage, so it is my opportunity to thank Professor Joachim von Braun, Chancellor Marcelo Suarez Orozco for their incredible capacity to bring us here. I want to thank one more person who has held the glue together of this conference and who all of you know, but few people have seen, and that's Matthew Fenlon sitting right in the back of the room, without all of whom all of us would not be here. So thank you, Matthew. And without further ado, I think this in many ways will be what brings our conversation really to a pitch. I want to note that our mayor, Seri Mokhunov, the mayor of Vinnytsia, will be speaking in Ukrainian. So if you don't yet have translation for yourself, please organize it now while I introduce and bring up our panelists. So yes, go ahead and move around. You've all seen Katya, who will moderate this panel for us. So Katya is going to be the glue that holds this discussion together. We have the Honorable Mayor of Cologne, Henriette Rieke, who you've met already. We have the Honorable Katrin Jakobsdottir, the former Prime Minister of Iceland, for this discussion. John Schnellenhuber, who many of you know, the Director General of the International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis. And then Nadia is coming back to join us from our earlier panel, our professor of physical oceanography from the University of Bologna. So panelists will make your way up here. Make sure you have translation so you can hear the comments from our mayor. Thanks very much.
Good question. Is it possible to give the clicker also to Mr. Mohammed?
Yes, I just don't know where it is.
Oh, yeah. Hello. Yeah, hello.
Yes, exactly. It's quite a unique, system. You know it.
Okay, I hope we are ready to start. Hi again from my side, and it's very good to see you again after yesterday. We are now at this pivotal session where we will be talking about a very important topic, and that is societal transformation. So the key letters of MUST. And societal transformation is not just about, resilience in the sense of, thinking backwards and seeing how to bounce back. It's also about how do we transform forward. And I'm very happy that I am joined by some of the best thought leaders here on stage, where we will be exploring various topics and trying to see how can different stakeholders actually come together to collaborate across all levels of governance and see what are the roles of mayors, what are the roles of civil society and youth, scientists, researchers, and so on. So without further ado, as a young person myself, well, borderline not anymore, but let's keep that a secret. It makes me very happy to see that, that all of you also have had experience in engaging with various stakeholders, including youth yourself. So I'm going to start with my neighbor, Mayor Rieke. And obviously, as a mayor, your job is to engage with the city. But what are your thoughts on, the European cities' preparedness and resilience, and how is this transformation actually going?
Good afternoon. First, I want to thank the organizers from this conference, and we hope it gives hope. We heard it in the last panel, it gives hope. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished colleagues, my observation after a lot of panels yesterday and today is that when we talk about resilient cities in Europe, we see first a lot of progress. Vienna with the impressive presentation we heard yesterday by Mayor Ludwig, Paris with its 15-minute city model, and Budapest with its similar measures that we all tackle. These are all examples of what is already possible with the necessary predisposed conditions. While we see innovation and commitment on the one hand, and we are also experiencing a rollback in climate policy, populist movements, economic pressure, empty city covers, fatigue among parts of the population, all of this is leading us to water down measures, postpone timetables, and adjust targets. How could it happen that we officially know global warming at least since 1992, and as global society give rise to a movement like Fridays for Future, and then watch as this momentum gets forgotten? We should regain the political and social support and prioritization necessary for real change and concrete implementation. In my view, we need new and stronger alliances, not only between cities, but also between city administrations and civil society, business, private business and culture, science and also religious communities. Above all, however, we must make democracy more resilient. Climate policy must not become a ball in the game of short-term majorities. We should have the courage to put the voices of the younger generations at the center, not just symbolically, but also structurally. We experienced it already at this inspiring conference with so much young expertise. Ladies and gentlemen, resilience requires cooperation across boundaries, between generations, countries, disciplines, and political levels. Only together can we form a strong bulwark against a rollback in climate policy and bring about sustainable social transformation. That's my deep truth. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much to Mayor Recker. I would just like to note that because Mayor will need to leave to catch her flight, of course, they are extremely busy people, so I'm very happy that she was able to stay and deliver her intervention. And most importantly, that it was highlighted that societal transformation isn't just a technical concept, it's a social commitment. And we need all the different actors, working together and really making sure that we are working across silos and that we do not put kind of horse blinds onto ourselves and only have tunnel vision for what we know and what we like, but that we need to look across different disciplines, across different generations, and so on, because we are stronger together. Now, going next to Ms. Jakobsdottir. You have an uncanny ability for getting some of the coolest jobs. And after being a Prime Minister of Iceland, you now have the honor of leading the Pan-European Commission on Climate and Health. So for anyone who is perhaps not yet super aware about what this commission is and what it does, because it was only launched a couple of months ago, can you tell us a little bit about the work of the Commission and then also how you managed to incorporate the theme of societal transformation into your efforts?
Well, thank you so much, Katja, and thank you to the organizers, and thank you to all of you who are showing so much dedication in being here and trying to solve all those challenges that we're faced with. And because this panel is about societal transformation and resilience, I think we are actually faced with very severe challenges and have been for some years here in Europe with conflict and war on our continent. We have gone through a very difficult pandemic. We have been faced with the crisis of climate and the crisis of biodiversity. We are seeing human displacements because of wars, conflicts, and environmental changes. So we have been faced with quite severe challenges. And it is quite, it's quite a job to kind of build resilience and do it with the social dimension in mind. And I can say that from my former job as the Prime Minister of Iceland, from 2017 to 2024, where there actually was this pandemic for 2 years, where we had a war in the continent, and we also had to deal with 7 volcanic eruptions very close to our capital in Reykjavik. We had to evacuate a whole town. So we know quite a bit about resilience in nature. And this is complicated because disruptions, like we see stemming from climate crisis, like we see stemming from the crisis of biodiversity, they are difficult to deal with, not least for politicians. And I can say that as a former professional politician, because we are always thinking in election terms that are very short and we need to get re-voted. So this is quite a challenge. I think, however, that we also need to think about how we have been dealing with this. And then I come to the Pan-European Commission that you asked about, which I am very honored and privileged to chair. It's an initiative from WHO Europe, and it's actually made up, magnificent people who have joined forces, who are the commissioners on this commission, all people with great experiences from administration and governance. And we say, okay, we have the facts on the table. We know what is happening, but we are dealing with also with the fact that, when many of you have spoken about this today, that we are seeing science denialism, climate denialism. We are seeing new technologies that are actually disrupting public debate, changing really the way we can do public debate. And we are seeing policymakers and politicians having to deal with that. So our goal is, of course, to build all our work on solid scientific foundation. And personally, I think when we see science undermined, I think it's one of the most severe challenges that we are facing today. And it's being kind of amplified by the new technologies. And our role is not just to write a report. Our main role is to hand some tools over to politicians and policymakers and say, yes, the climate crisis is overwhelming, but there are things that can be done and can be changed, even within one election term. And I sincerely believe that we can do that. Many of you have mentioned those solutions today when it comes to infrastructure, etc. But our challenge is always, how can we create the societal transformation? Because it's not just about infrastructure, as many of you have said today. It's very important to build infrastructure, to increase resilience, and actually be able to implement not only adaptation, as we so often speak about when we talk about resilience, but also mitigation, but also to create a society where we are thinking holistically about the well-being of all. And what we are hoping to do, we always say it's going to be 12 pages, our report, and not 100, because we want someone to read it. And we are aiming to actually deliver our results next spring. And I am optimistic because it's such a great set of people, and we sincerely believe that positive climate action is also positive health action. And we build that on solid scientific ground. And there are so many things we can do on different levels of governance that actually can change the lives of people for the better. So I will stop now. I know I'm supposed to stop. You have started nodding, and that's a good thing.
Also,
please correct me if I'm wrong, but I do believe that you have a youth representative on the commission as well.
Here in this room?
No, on the commission. Omnia?
Yes, Omnia is on the commission, and Sir Andrew Haynes, who was here this morning, is our chief scientific advisor. Sandrine Dixon de Cleve, I think she had to leave for the airport, but she is also a member of the commission. So we have quite a broad regional and quite a broad experience within our commission. And that's important too, because we're dealing with a continent. Things are very different in the subarctic where I live, or in the eastern part of Europe, or when it comes to the Mediterranean, and we have to think about all those regional differences, but the challenges are still remarkably alike.
Thank you so much. I was mainly asking because in order to really make sure that the societal transformation shines, we have to, start where we can, and seeing that the Commission has incorporated so many different profiles in it, including civil society and youth, is extremely important as well. So thank you for sharing that, and also for pinpointing who are our go-to dinner conversationalists later on, especially if you want to learn a little bit more about the Commission. But now moving on to our next speaker, Mayor Morjuno, we are very glad that you were able to join us. And Vinica is a very, very nice city, but it is in the heart of Ukraine. And obviously, Ukraine is currently dealing with a set of multiple crises, climate being just one of them. So my question to you is it possible to implement climate measures in the times of crisis that Ukraine is currently facing? And what is your city, Vinica, focusing on?
Доброго дня. По-перше, я хотів би подякувати за те, що запросили представника мене як українських муніципалітетів на таку важливу конференцію, тому що це питання так само актуально, не дивлячись на війну і в Україні. Я знову ж таки, мабуть, таки нагадаю, що в Україні вже третій рік війна, і, звичайно, це в тому числі і досить серйозно впливає на екологію нашої країни і європейського континенту в цілому. Наприклад, там знищення Херсонської ГЕС, яка фактично річку Південний Буг, річку Дніпро досить серйозно змінила. Так? Але я вже не говорю про коженденні ракетні удари по критичній інфраструктурі цивільних міст, а це знову ж таки викиди відповідно і в атмосферу, і, звичайно, це досить серйозні виклики. Але разом із тим Вінниця, наприклад, продовжує реалізацію кліматичної політики. Це фактично для нас є наскрізною темою нашої стійкості, відновлення та євроінтеграції. І от війна реально щодня поглинає досить багато ресурсів. І, на жаль, в зв'язку з війною всі громади, чи більшість громад України, вони направляють ресурси свої на три таких напрямки. Це безпека і оборона, це стійкість, фактично це робота критичної інфраструктури і турбота над людьми.
Please, just a second. Can we make sure that we have the PowerPoint presentation? We have a PowerPoint presentation to go with Mayor's intervention. No? Okay, then please continue.
Це погано, що немає презентації, але я в загальних рисах без презентації скажу. Значить, і дивіться, ми коли проводили відповідні дослідження щодо задоволеності життя вінничан в Вінниці, і навіть цікавий такий для нас є парадокс, що сьогодні українці демонструють своє ставлення до цінностей цивілізованого світу досить цікаво. Здавалося б, що саме основне, там, наприклад, по піраміді Маслоу повинно було би бути питання безпеки. На жаль, немає цього слайда, але крім безпеки, на сьогоднішній день в основних таких критеріях це справедливість, рівність, повага, в тому числі і є ставлення до довкілля. Тобто один із 5 основних напрямків, які хвилюють вінничан, це в тому числі і довкілля. І саме запит на якісне довкілля серед вінничан є одним із пріоритетів. Але разом із тим оцінка стану довкілля є одною з найнижчих порівняно з іншими сферами. Тобто мешканці нашої громади, вони адекватно оцінюють рівень того довкілля і що над цим необхідно працювати. Коли ми провели наукову оцінку вразливості громад до зміни клімату, то результати свідчать про те, що у найближчі десятиліття в нашій місцевості є високі ризики, а саме теплових стресів, зменшення запасів води і втрати зелених зон. Знову ж таки, на жаль, слайда немає, але в нас ми зробили таку інтерактивну мапу, на якій було фактично показано, люди самі визначали основні місця, де, ну, знаєте, перегрівається територія, де мало зелених зон, де досить серйозно нагрівається асфальт. І вроді показую, що буде презентація, так? От. Да. Ну, це в 2 словах, де знаходиться Вінниця, ви побачите населення 400 тисяч, 43 тисячі переселенців. І знову ж таки це додатковий виклик щодо адаптації цих людей в нашій територіальній громаді. Оце якраз те, що ми говорили про соціологічні дослідження і саме питання екології є досить важливим. Це ті виклики, про які і ризики, про які сьогодні відзначають вінничани, а саме теплові стреси, зменшення запасів води і втрати зелених зон. А ось про ці інтерактивні мапи, де саме теплові хвилі в останні роки стали новим явищем для нашої місцевості. І щоб побудувати такий розумний план дій із нейтралізації, ми почали обговорювати оці питання температури міста, і цього літа воно отримало таке широке, досить публічне обговорення. І я хотів би наголосити на тому, що саме молодь в даному випадку була сама активна в проведенні цих досліджень і цих обговорень. І вже цієї осені наші фахівці співставлять фактичні температурні дані з думкою містян, і ми запропонуємо відповідне рішення для наступного сезону щодо пріоритетних зон. І також нам в даному випадку досить цікавий досвід охолодження так званого міст на прикладі інших міст, в тому числі там Кьольна, Парижа там, чи Барселони і так далі. Досить важливе питання для нас – це малі річки, так звані малі річки. Ми займалися цим питанням 4 фактично роки, ще на початку війни. Саме молоді люди проявили ініціативу, і ми виявили, що і відкрили для містян 64 прихованих водотоки загальною протяжністю 109 кілометрів. І фактично це стало новим ресурсом для кліматичної адаптації та створення зелених просторів. Ну і, звичайно, наша мета – застосувати сучасні методи ревіталізації водойм і створити в місті таку мережу блакитних зелених коридорів і відкрити ці всі річки. Тому що, на жаль, раніше урбаністика міста, і не тільки міста Вінниця, і України, отакі малі річки всі заганяли в такі, знаєте, труби, якісь тунелі і так далі. Зараз наша мета – розкрити ці річки, і для того, щоб це, знову ж таки, і буде впливати на температурний режим тих чи інших частин міста. І разом із тим, ми, коли провели таку роботу по дослідженню топоніміки і зробили найменування цих річок, то ми фактично зафіксували це таким чином, що в майбутньому навіть хто би не був, наприклад, при владі, вже ці річки, вони в трубиці вже не будуть ховатися. От. Наступне питання – це те, що стосується стійкості з точки зору міського озеленення у майбутньому. І ми вже розпочали роботу над вивченням і збереженням місцевого біорозмаїття. І ми, коли вивчили оцю ситуацію, то, наприклад, по інвазивним рослинам, то спільно з науковцями виявили, що природним чином на території проживають 104 види рослин. Із них 22 види – це є інвазивні, а 9 – це мають високий рівень агресивності. І на підставі цих даних ми будемо планувати і оновлювати політику міського озеленення. Запровадили так само по ініціативі молодіжних НГО, громадських організацій, проєкт «Луки в Вінниці». Сьогодні це 1,5 гектара землі. Ми розуміємо, що саме ці луки очищають повітря, утримують вологу, підтримують біорозмаїття і при цьому, саме головне, потребують мінімального догляду. Знову ж таки, про молодих людей. От у нас проєкт «Шаттл» по роздільному збору сміття. До 2020 року у нас збір сміття відбувався на 2 фракціях – суха і волога. І от саме молодіжна станція сортування «Шаттл», вона і дала такий поштовх до розширення оцієї фракції по збору сміття. Далі ми пішли ще більше, і саме за ініціативою цих молодих людей ми організували таку програму «Чисте місто починається з тебе», куди долучилося 25 об'єднань співвласників багатоповерхових будинків, а це приблизно 8 тисяч людей, які проживають в цих будинках, і почали сортувати сміття по 4 фракціях. І буквально на початку цього року відкрили першу муніципальну таку станцію чи центр управління відходами, де збираються відходи 12 типів. І вже 5% вінничан от саме відвідали і скористувалися саме оцим муніципальним центром управління відходів. Звичайно, без стратегії, як на національному рівні, я думаю, глобальному, європейському, світовому, щодо поводження з кліматом і з екологією, так само на рівні міських стратегій ми усвідомлюємо, що ці кліматичні зміни – це є один із основних викликів сучасності. І саме тому ці всі наші екологічні проекти, вони були закладені і в концепцію інтегрованого розвитку міста Вінниці до 2030 року, і в нашу стратегію 3.0. Ну, на жаль, ми повинні в зв'язку з війною вносити певні корективи в цю стратегію і, знову ж таки, вивчати в тому числі громадську думку щодо нагальних потреб і пріоритетів щодо реалізації цієї стратегії. Але я хотів сказати, що ми перше місто в Україні, яке в січні 2022 року приєдналося до Європейського зеленого курсу. Але знову ж таки хотів би наголосити, що всі ті плани і заходи, які ми передбачали в рамках реалізації на наступних 5 років, досить серйозно нам поламала війна. Ми досить активно працюємо з різними громадськими і міжнародними організаціями і щодо дотримання нашої екологічної політики, але точно без співпраці з цими організаціями нам було б набагато тяжче працювати в цьому напрямку. Але я хотів би тут наголосити, що саме мери, міські голови, вони персонально несуть відповідальність перед своєю громадою, звичайно, разом з своїми командами, щодо впровадження тої чи іншої політики. І мені здається, що от саме залучення до таких високоповажних форумів і конференцій представників місцевого самоврядування – це дуже актуальна і важлива тема. І в тому числі я хотів би сказати, наприклад, що от мені було з одного боку і неприємно, і важливо побачити і зрозуміти, що саме Ватикан опікується цією темою, але, на жаль, в Україні сьогодні представники церков, вони взагалі не обговорюють цю історію. І на це теж, мені здається, необхідно звернути увагу, щоб всі представники суспільства українського, вони так само були долучені до цієї важливої теми, обговорення і так далі. Ну і на завершення, однозначно без фінансового ресурсу, без фінансового інструменту, я би так сказав, реалізовувати будь-яку політику неможливо. Тому що це може робити дуже маленькими кроками. Ну, наприклад, от дивіться, якщо взяти бюджет міста, ви бачите там, а тут нема бюджету, 160 мільйонів євро бюджет міста. Наприклад, для того, щоб замінити повністю транспорт, громадський транспорт, який користується викопними видами палива, на електротранспорт місту Вінницю необхідно не менше 60 мільйонів євро. Тобто зрозуміло, що ніяка громада, навіть така відносно немаленька чи такого середнього рівня для України, вона не буде спроможна навіть за 10 років реалізувати, наприклад, проект переходу повністю на електротранспорт в нашому місті. Ну і багато інших аспектів. Або сьогодні був представник з Іспанії, який опікується водними ресурсами, так, і говорить про очисні споруди і так далі. Модернізація системи очисних споруд в місті Вінниця, це знову ж таки вплив на довкілля, потребує інвестицій не менше 20 мільйонів євро. І, звичайно, всі питання, які стосуються фінансових інструментів, вони дуже важливі в реалізації в цілому політики і на глобальному, регіональному або урядовому рівнях. Тому дякую, і ми готові завжди до відповідної співпраці, діалогу. І я думаю, що не дивлячись на війну, ми однозначно рухаємося в цьому напрямку. І, звичайно, ми потребуємо партнерств в впровадженні тих чи інших наших кроків щодо реалізації цієї теми. Дякую.
Thank you very much. I do have to say that it is amazing to see a very practical example of what can be done in a city, and I have a feeling that a lot of other mayors from other cities should actually take the example of Vinica, seeing what can be done, because climate change is such a huge problem that it may be daunting for mayors to, even figure out where to first start. But you can see that there is a lot that can be done when the community comes together and really makes sure that there are different projects in place, from the meadows to the rivers to the waste management systems. Congratulations on establishing that, by the way. And then also to actually proving that, even with the lack of financial resources, there are still things that can be done, even when you have limitations, because obviously where there is will, there's a way. And thank you very much for sharing the experience from your city. So now we'll move on to our next speaker. This is the wrong slide, but I do know your name. So, Mr. Schellenhuber, you work in a field that is, I think, very relevant to all of us. And we've heard now from two mayors, and obviously cities have to be made out of something, right? And it has become more and more evident that the built environment is actually something that has a very huge impact and is a very big climate challenge. The construction, the operation, and the demolition of buildings come up to approximately 40% of greenhouse gas emissions, but not all of the projects that are currently ongoing actually take into consideration the social strata. So the question that we have for you is, do you have any examples or ideas for strategies or concepts that can kind of put all of these criteria together and really make sure that the built environment works for us and for the planet?
Yeah, thank you. So actually I would like to talk about what I call the elephant in the climate room, which was touched upon a little bit here and there during this conference, but what I have to say matches very well what, for example, the mayor of Venezia just said, and others have related to that. The other thing, and I want to discuss it in terms precisely of the structure of the conference here, namely mitigation, adaptation, social transformation. So that's the one thing. I want to be very concrete, actually. And by the way, touch upon the CCU question. The other thing is a completely impossible task because many have left. Those who have stayed are very exhausted, I guess. And I would like to remind you first of the scope of the challenge we are debating. So Örjan Gustafsson, he's still here? Yes, absolutely. Örjan touched upon it when he talked about overshoot. And I think the first thing we have to consider is we unfortunately, because we were not able over the last 30, 40 years to really bring the emissions down, we are now facing overshoot management as the way to rescue civilization in the Anthropocene. It is like that. And I share one slide with you on that and explain a little bit what the challenges are. So let's see if it works. Yes. So it's a very simple slide. I'm a theoretical physicist by training, so of course I love figures like that. So, but on the horizontal axis, very simple. You have the timeline starting in 1900 and extending to 2200. On a vertical axis, you have just global warming with reference to the pre-industrial warming. So 1 degree warming, 2 degrees, and so on. So let's look at the Paris lines, 1.5 degrees. We talked about it. I was member of the German delegation in Paris, so I was advisor to Angela Merkel for more than 10 years. So, and then of course what, from the point of view of science, climate science, impact science, is the more important line, that is 2 degrees. Of course, we could also always argue, and we know every 1/10 of a degree counts, but according to my analysis at least, when we go far beyond 2 degrees, we are in a different regime actually, which we cannot manage anymore. Now, what is the development so far? And this is a cartoon presentation, of course. So Thomas Stocker, don't shout at me if I miss 1% of precision, something like that. So here we are. In the last year, we were, according to Berkeley Earth at least, at 1.6 degrees warming. This year will become a little bit cooler, maybe 1.4 or something, but we will not go back to cooler times. No way, no chance. The laws of nature will not allow us. So where will we go if current policies are implemented? Somehow, like here, far beyond 2 degrees. And this, I think, is something that our global civilization could not digest, actually. I think it would be the end of the civilization as we know it. Because of tipping points, because of disruption, because of heat waves, you name it. So the only alternative we have is to bend that curve. The current policies are not bending the curve. So this is the desired scenario, bending the curve. But what you should be aware of, there will be overshoot. Overshoot beyond 1.5 degrees anyway, but we will overshoot also to 2 degrees. All we need to find out and what all we need to manage is to keep the overshoot as short and flat as possible. Because some of the big disasters in the Earth system, like the melting of the Greenland ice sheet with a sea level rise of 7 meters, can still be avoided if this episode is very short. So, what are we going to do? It comes in two parcels. First, we have to reduce emissions to zero, clearly. Ideally, by 2040, China will catch up a little bit later. This would only keep the curve fairly flat for centuries. So it would not really bend the curve, it would make it flat, that is climate stabilization. The second part in the equation is this one, negative emissions. We cannot avoid discussing that. Now here the geoengineering thing comes in, of course. Can we do CDR, carbon dioxide removal, direct air capture, all these things? Now actually I have looked at all the papers in the last 20 years. I organized the first geoengineering conference in Cambridge, in Europe actually in 2003, and so on and so on. Even CCU would only be a neutral thing. It would not really remove carbon from the atmosphere. So all of the schemes I've seen are too expensive, will not scale really. You have all types of potential impacts. So it's not the solution, unfortunately. It would be wonderful if we could just shoot 1,000 rockets into the stratosphere, disseminate sulfur, and that would be it. It will not work, believe me. So there are alternatives to that. But first of all, I would like to introduce a term. We're currently writing a paper on that. It's the overshoot integral. Because this is the term, this is the quantity, the factor, which will decide on whether we can move our civilization through the next centuries. Because this overshoot means, of course, there will be impacts we are not adapted to. We will try to adapt to, but it will be much more different. People talked about the little ice age in Europe. This is nothing compared to what is going to happen here. So many disruptions will happen, but we will have to adapt to that. So this overshoot integral, and we have to make it as small as possible, of course, will decide on the future of our civilization. Now I turn to the built environment, clearly, because I think this is the most important factor in the whole equation. And it's not about better isolation of buildings and things like that. I'm not talking about energy efficiency. I talk about the materials, actually. So, let's skip this. Just wanted to remind you that a colleague of mine with whom I've written a paper called The Climate Endgame, it is precisely about these scenarios. Luke Kemp from the Cambridge Center for Existential Risks has just published a book that shot into the bestseller list in the UK. I think it's number 2 now, called Goliath's Curse. It's about these existential risks and how societies in the past have tried to do that. Goliath, of course, refers to an inflated system, you know, where people think we are so strong, we will stand any challenge, and you know what happened to Goliath. Anyway, watch out for this book. It's fascinating reading. But now for the solutions. It comes in 3 parts. When it comes to mitigation, we published a paper in 2020 on buildings as a global carbon sink. You substitute concrete and steel and plastic and aluminum and all these things by organic material, like timber, like hemp, like clay, and like bamboo, which is for the southern sphere the most important material. And when you turn construction from climate damaging into climate healing, because every ton of timber, for example, which is put to long-term use in a building, stores 1 ton of CO2, which was before extracted from the atmosphere by photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is the biggest evolution ever made. We would not breathe, we would not be here, we could not eat, but it is storing CO2 and it's feeding on our atmospheric garbage, actually, coming from fossil fuel burning. So if we really turn cities, infrastructures, into organic material, if you like, then we can extract a tremendous amount of carbon from the atmosphere. It has only benefits because it's more beautiful, it's healthy, and so on. In that paper, we argue, because it's a quantitative analysis, it can be done. And actually, in the beginning, I thought this paper would be completely ignored. It's now one of my most cited papers. This morning, it crossed the 1,000 citation line in Google, at least, and so it has created a wave of interest, and there are many follow-up papers now. So, saving the world by timber cities. So that's the shorthand expression for that. And we had, because I'm a member of the Pontifical Academy, and we have our distinguished leaders here, Joachim von Braun, the president, and Cardinal Turkson. We did a conference together with Ursula von der Leyen. You can see her here in the middle, and the German Minister for Construction, Pritzker Prize winners, so were these eminent architects like Francis Carré, Shigeru Ban, and so on. This was a conference done in 2022, and it was precisely about the construction sector and sustainable forestry, of course, because you need to provide the materials for that. I think it was a highly successful, and it is published by Berghuis in this book, Reconstructing the Future. We paid for the license. You can download it without any cost. So please enjoy. So this is about mitigation. Adaptation. I recently gave a talk at Peking University. Standing next to me is Professor Yu. He invented the sponge city concept. And again, that's why I talked before about slow and fast variables. Creating sponge city is not something you can do overnight. I mean, it's very appropriate in Ukraine, for example, if you have already destruction or you are trying to improve your municipalities, you can go for this concept, and here are beautiful realizations. The thing is, it was realized in China, you know, and where you didn't have to set up startups and convince investors, you simply had to convince the State Council, and it was done. It's a different way. We always talked about democracy during this conference. The world is not entirely run by democracy, yeah? So we have to think also of benevolent autocracy and things like that. But anyway, it's a powerful concept. Sponge cities, which also, they do not just suck up water, they also foster biodiversity and many other things. Huh? So that's so far for the adaptation. Now for the social transformation, I have just one slide before you become nervous. That's this one here. What do you see here? This is a beautiful timber construction done by the University of Stuttgart. It's the pavilion for the National Gardens exhibition. And this is the pavilion of 2019, standing in Heilbronn, German city, small German city. What is this? It's also the pavilion in Mannheim at the same exhibition in 2023. Why? Because it was built in a way that you can decompose it and the pieces can be put on railway wagons and transported to any place you like, actually. So what I think here, and what is in a way important for our cultural perception, is We call that fluid architecture. We can call it circular building schemes, things like that. But what does it mean? It means, you know, the first revolution that made our culture, civilization, was the Neolithic revolution. It brought about cities where culture was born. That was 10,000 years ago. When 200 years ago, the other big revolution happened that brought about modernity through fossil fuels, that was called the Industrial Revolution. Now, we have, in a way, to undo the settling down of people. So I could imagine that if you migrate, if you relocate, your house will follow you. It will be recomposed in a different place, but according to the same design. Or you will behave like nomadic people moving through the built environment. You don't even need to own it. Now, these are wacky ideas, and you can think I have lost my mind. I haven't, believe me. And I had some wacky ideas, or sounded wacky ideas, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. And in the end, it turned out they had a lot to do with reality. So I think fluid architecture will happen. But what it really means, our notion, our perception of what we call home, what we call house, what we call castle, what we call neighborhood, will be changed as well. So I provided you with 3 ways of transformation: for mitigation, timber cities; for adaptation, sponge cities; and in the end, for a new way of adopting cultural philosophies, that is, fluid cities. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the presentation. So if I try to sum it up very, very briefly, all you're saying is we need to survive the overshoot and hope that it's only overshoot and not business as usual. Second, we need to find the David to our Goliath when it comes to climate change and the fossil fuel emissions and all of that fun stuff. And then the last thing is that there's a lot of really attractive solutions to a slightly, as you said, less attractive topic. But if we promote it well, we can actually make buildings become a part of life itself as well.
No, thank you for reminding me even of that, because what I want to provide, and it's not me alone, there are now hundreds of people working in the field. Ursula von der Leyen has created a new European Bauhaus. And some people here in the room, like Brigitte Mohn, she was at the meeting, of course, Joachim von Braun and Cardinal Turkson and so on. It's an entire community. But I wanted to underline and to emphasize this. Although this overshoot management is a terrible and even a brutal challenge, we can provide a positive narrative. And maybe the last remark is, if you look around in the world, the built world, not if you go to Richmond in southwest London or Vienna, which is a beautiful city, but if you go to Lagos, to Bukavu, to Dar es Salaam, and so on, this is not a built environment in which we want people to live. So the built environment has to be humanized anyway. But here's the wonderful thing. The win-win situation is we can humanize the built environment by going to organic materials, for example, and nature-based design principles. And at the same time, even as a side effect, we can repair the climate. And this is the best value proposition I can give you.
Perfect. And now going from nature-based solutions to human-based solutions, I will now call on to our last panelist, Ms. Pinardi. So besides working in physical oceanography, you are also a champion of youth. And as your chosen topic, what can you tell us about youth engagement? Because youth in general, we have heard through many panels throughout the past 2 days, are critical agents of change when it comes to societal transformation. And whether that is from the language in the community, the digital fluency, innovative approaches, and all of that, we need to kind of collaborate across different generations, across different sectors, especially with young people, and make sure that their aspirations and aspirations of future generations and the needs are reflected in the solutions that are offered. So the question is, how do we ensure that there are more youth voices present in different governance spaces, and what kind of mechanisms or tools are maybe out there to strengthen the approaches of meaningful youth engagement, not tokenistic youth engagement, and really make sure that the involvement is able to shine?
Thank you very much, and I thank also this conference for having already done something involving the youth in the discussion. And this is very important. So, as you say, I work with youth and I find it my best, most important part of my work. And as also a researcher in a research center in Italy's Climate Center, we understood very soon that we needed to insert education in our programs. So I'm adding one more piece of the puzzle that wasn't discussed a lot, but maybe try to be short. I'm trying to change education. So we also took a decision. We took the decision that education, that the research institute or university has to provide is up to, and let's say, at least starting from high school. So we can start only at the university. And this comes from the understanding that people are much more acculturated now and ready to get on board. So I have 3 experiences to communicate, and that are all, in my opinion, very exciting, but they require more support because they haven't been advocated as much as others. And the first experience is that we need to enforce programs including climate science at high school level. I work for that in Italy, and it's not easy. The disciplinary barriers to study the Earth system have to be broken. We can't wait to know all the mathematics, all the biology, all the chemistry to start talking about the Earth. It's impossible. So climate curricula in high school programs have a fundamental importance. And still in Italy, climate science is little, if not completely absent. And then the next step is that I cannot do all the high schools in Italy or my colleagues, that we have to train the trainers. And training the trainers is a totally different ballgame. It requires continuous education of our teaching sector, of our educators, and it is shocking for a person like me that works in that field to know how little this is done and is advocated for at UN and national European level. The second step is to engage youth with the new methods, the new possibilities. And one of them is citizen science. I do that, and the experience of working in the field with the young people that really see the temperature at different height in the atmosphere or at different depths in the ocean, that's the part I do most, is really important. There is no lecture. Galileo already said that, right? For the natural system, you need observations. And observing is like in astronomy. You have to observe the stars to know about the stars. And you need to observe the ocean, the atmosphere, the land to know about it. So why don't we really, now there are a lot of possibilities, start with employing citizen science as a way to increase youth knowledge about the Earth system without waiting for all biology, chemistry, mathematics, and physics to be done. And it is possible. So I had an example, but it's too late. The last one I want to talk about, which is other important part, which I do with Foundation Golinelli in Bologna, which, by the way, it would be a very nice thing. They look at art and science for getting new entrepreneur. So my feeling is that high school people are ready to think about entrepreneurship. This is too difficult for an Italian. We did a school, just to give you the name of the school, to create a young entrepreneur. The title was Big Data and Climate Change. I can assure you the results of the school were astonishing. And the people were not all the best people in the school, okay? There were people that wanted to get involved. That's a different concept. And, they had wonderful ideas on how to monitor the product expiration date so you can eat the product in your refrigerator before it gets wasted, or offering discount depending on the number of steps done during the day by making a network of cafes in Bologna that would give that almost for free with a discount. So it was wonderful. It was really nice. And so the source of inspiration, not only they have to learn, we learn from them. I learn from them. So in conclusion, I'd like to mention Mandela. Education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. Thank you.
I definitely agree on the point that education is a key element of really making sure that the whole of society can be empowered and have the necessary skills to work together to fight against climate change. And that, of course, starts with youth, as you very nicely highlighted. It is also great that you were able to showcase a couple of really good examples of how Bologna engaged young people in a meaningful way that wasn't just consulting them, but actually had proper implementation, follow-up, and then evaluation of the whole practice so that you could see kind of what the results really were and what lessons can be learned for that going forward. And when it comes to meaningful youth engagement, that's what we are always kind of trying to strive towards, but not everyone really knows how to do it. And there are a couple of really good tools around it if you want to educate yourself about it. From Roger Hart's Ladder of Participation to the Lundy model that informed UNICEF's Right of Child. These are a couple of great resources if you want to learn a bit more about how to engage youth in a good and meaningful way. But also because, as history kind of taught us, a lot of revolutions started with youth and students at the forefront, so why not climate revolution, right? So with this, I will maybe now turn to our lovely audience who is patient enough to wait for 2 whole days for this final moment to share your own thoughts on societal transformation. And perhaps if you have any questions for our wonderful panelists, this is your chance. Okay, the sir in the front.
Yeah, okay. Thank you all very much for this wonderful panel. I think it was a very nice concluding panel. I have one question to John Schellenhuber, who actually gave us a nice way out of a possible unsurmountable problem with using photosynthesis as a carbon remover. My question is about the timescales. You have around, if I remember your figure correctly, around 100 years to get your overshoot integral in order, so that's the climatologic timescale, and then you have the biologic timescales to get the timber. Can you get the timber in a good time to solve the problem?
No, I'm very grateful that you raised the question. Oh, it was on my mind, but for the sake of time, try to close the argument, of course. First, the bad news. I mean, it took us about 200 years to ruin the atmosphere. It may take 200 years to repair it. But this is, I think, a realistic assumption. Nobody knows whether we can bring about this transformation of the built environment, but so many things speak for it. It's a question whether we can accelerate this, which we hope very much, of course, whether we can accelerate it to maybe 50 years or something. Depends on demand and supply. And first of all, whenever you talk about timber cities, people say, do we have enough forests and so on? Actually, a paper just appeared a week ago showing that we can harvest enough biomass in Europe for every new building or every new infrastructure. Why? Because the CO2 fertilization effect makes our forests grow like wild, in spite of the bark beetle and in spite of the fires. All in all, the world is getting greener, and this is an anthropogenic effect. So in principle, we will have enough biomass if we take into account, and that was also touched upon in previous panels, degraded land which can be reforested, which is a benefit in its own, clearly. The only thing we shouldn't do is to raise even more cattle for eating meat, because that's a factor we should not include in our diet, and also this was touched upon. But on the supply side, in principle, I'm very optimistic. The other thing is the demand side. And this is now where the cities, in my view, are the most important stakeholders. At the municipality level, I think, we have the best chance to save the world. Yes, we need national governments and we need individual decisions, but I think at the city level, it all comes together. Now, if at the city level, enlightened communities, councils, and say, let's just build each and every hospital from timber, for example, or in the global south from bamboo, things like that, or at least in a hybrid way. There are so many things that speak for it. Or if you put another story on an existing building, if you do it with concrete and steel, the weight is just forbidding. If you do it with timber framework, it's just 1/10 of the weight. So it would be absolutely stupid not to use the space. You do not have to seal additional space. So if at the council, at the municipality level, even at the megalopolis level, people see that light and say, okay, why not using this solution, which will make our citizens healthier, and the thing will be more beautiful, and let's go for it. Last remark on that, because of us, we did all type of surveys, and we're working together very closely with the architecture department at Princeton University. And we did a survey, school people, also pupils, and asked them, those who are educated, and here we come to education again, in timber schools, and they were asked, do you like it? Yes. Why do you like it? It smells so good. And you know, these sentiments, these affections are extremely important. So if we tell the right story, when the demand will be created, and the quicker the better, of course. So when it comes to time frame, you know, there's this Chinese saying, even a long journey starts with the first step. The first step has to be done, but, and this is, I think, a call to arms to us all. Let's do it as soon as possible.
It also brings us full circle again to education, right? And it's not just about people who work in climate scientists, it's about construction workers, engineers, architects. Across the different sectors and disciplines, this is important. Okay, we have time for one intervention. We'll take both of you. So we have Olha and Paulina over there. So maybe we'll collect both questions together and then turn to the panelists.
Yes, so thank you everyone for your presentations. It's been very insightful. I was the one leading the discussion on vulnerable populations yesterday, and that's the topic I'm mostly focusing on. And when you're talking about temperatures will rise, and yes, we as humanity might survive, it also means vulnerable populations will not. And that's a reality that I fear we haven't really talked about in these 2 days. Is we know with what is happening, there are people dying right now, and these people will continue dying even if humanity survives, and that's why this topic is important after all, because it's not about some humans surviving, but it's about all humans surviving and not just the most privileged. So I was wondering specifically generally on your thoughts about this and how we can tackle this more, but also for the Honorable Mayor Muhunov, if you've actually been able to look at how the measures you've taken have been able to also impact vulnerable populations, or Professor Pinardi of how the education has been targeted. You've been talking about social differences, etc. So yeah, thank you so much.
Okay, and quickly, Olha as well. In the meantime, I will ask the panelists to prepare 10-second responses.
I was leading the social participation discussion yesterday, and I've heard some really great examples, but I would like to get to know more about the particular mechanisms or the participation tools that can get the community, or more importantly, the youth, to play active role and to get involved more into societal transformation. And I think this is a question more to Nadia and Serhi, as they were talking about the youth engagement. Thank you.
Perfect. Ms. Pinardi, would you be ready to start?
Well, equity and the, I should take it out. The principle of having equal opportunities for education is of utmost importance. And in our, good society, let's say, democratic society, we have a way to do it that is easy. The other way is that we need to always consider the giving opportunity to very different people, a little bit crossing with the other, and then I try to finish. I had a wonderful experience by using e-learning, because e-learning, if it is well done, it requires some good work with experts in education and so, but has two immediate effects. First, it allows remote people to participate without waiting for getting all the resources. And so the e-learning platform, let's say, if we want to call it can be used, has to be structured, as I said. And the other one, which was my experience, it allowed the people who had, different kind of handicap to have a chance. And they came actually out of this experience of entrepreneurship teaching in an incredible way. There were people who could not normally go to school and especially follow this, but we left the space to them and we structured our courses so they could follow them. So it is in the hands of the educators, and e-learning can be used to facilitate. One point. Thank you.
Ms. Jakobsdottir.
I would just like to mention two things. First, on vulnerable groups. I live in Iceland, so the Arctic is very much on top of my mind. And we have several indigenous groups living around the Arctic. However, when we are talking about the Arctic, we are not taking the necessary notice of their knowledge and their experience, which is, in my opinion, absolutely vital to find solutions for the Arctic. So this is something that we need to think about. I so absolutely agree with you, because we cannot only talk about survival of humanity, we must be very inclusive in how we do that. And when we talk about societal transformation, that must be a very inclusive societal transformation, not only about youth, but also about different groups, like the indigenous groups. My second point is about narrative, because I so much agree with Nadia here on education. When I was the Minister for Education in Iceland, we actually implemented education in sustainability on every educational level. And people are quite happy about it. But still, even in spite of that, we're dealing with the fact that the climate narrative is a narrative that we all need to make sacrifices to achieve results, and people really don't like making sacrifices, be it eating meat or driving your car. And I think we need to put this in a new context, which is really the sacrifice we will all be making, for example, when it comes to our health. If this development continues that John showed us here, because it's going to have such severe health effects, not only on physical health, not only on vulnerable groups, it's also going to have serious effects on mental health, on our water supplies, on our food systems. So I think we need to kind of turn that narrative, and I think that's why I think this is so important that we talk about climate and health at the same moment, because we do care about our health. We don't want to sacrifice our health. And I think we need to be more, we need to push that agenda more strongly, because climate is about planetary health, but it's also about our personal health. And this is one thing that I think one part of the message that we need to push as a group.
And I give the last.
Але я ще би хотів би додати те, що сказала пані Катрін, що крім здоров'я ще потрібен мир. Чому? Тому що, на жаль, сьогодні в Україні кожен день гинуть люди. І гинуть люди не тільки на фронті, а гинуть в цивільних містах. Вчора, наприклад, Київ зазнав досить масованої ракетної атаки, 23 людини загинуло, 8 людей ще не знайшли і 53 людини поранених. І кожне місто зазнає отаких втрат. І на сьогоднішній день дуже важливо, перше, для України, і в тому числі для Вінниці, це досягнення справедливого миру, якого добивається наш президент Зеленський разом з європейськими лідерами. І я дякую всій демократичній спільноті за підтримку України. Це перша теза. Друга теза. Після завершення війни розпочинається процес відбудови і відновлення. І сьогодні дискусії на цю тему відбуваються в всьому демократичному світі. На майданчиках Сполучених Штатів, Європи і так далі. Основне завдання сьогодні для України – це відновити міста, щоб вони були краще, чим вони були до війни. З врахуванням всіх питань і довкілля. І дуже важливо, щоб оті люди, які виїхали, вимушено виїхали в Європу, а по різним оцінкам це від 6 до 8 мільйонів людей, щоб вони повернулися в Україну. А вони можуть повернутися в Україну, в тому числі, якщо будуть враховані всі інтереси кліматичних змін або довкілля. Тому що я вам показав на прикладі, як вінничани реагують і які вони для себе ставлять пріоритети. Тобто комфортність проживання в громаді – це не тільки там робоче місце чи своя домівка, а це якісний громадський транспорт, екологічний транспорт, це зони відпочинку, це відповідний температурний режим в своїх містах. Ну і багато тих напрямків, які сьогодні обговорювалися на цій конференції. Дякую.
And on that really strong And with this really strong ending message, we will wrap up our panel. So thank you very much to our wonderful panelists for all the knowledge you shared with us. And I hope this will continue the conversations in the hallways later on. And now giving the floor.
Your seats. Can I have a microphone? Why don't you just stay in your seats, panelists, in order to save time. Is this microphone on? Yeah. Colleagues, not on? I take this one. Yes, we need peace for peace's sake. We need peace for climate resilience sake. And we need climate resilience for peace sake. Because the scenario which you, John, have outlined will be a non-peaceful human environment. We cannot imagine that under these temperature scenarios the world will be peaceful. Resource conflicts will be tremendous. Marcelo and I will do a few closing remarks. We will not make a heroic attempt to sum up. Those who have left because they are already out there to spread the good message from this conference, and you will do too. I want to start by thanking all those who have made the conference efficient, effective, possible, substantively, financially. I want to give a special thanks to the translators. Here is one who speaks slowly. So with me, you have an easy task. Thank you for what you did. What can you expect from us, the Pontifical Academies of Sciences, from here on? Marcelo will talk about the way forward in a moment. I want to assure you that we will continue with our emphasis on science-based solutions related to the climate agenda, as we have done in the past 2 decades, especially intensively so in the last 8 years. And we always have combined the climate agenda with the biodiversity agenda, always. And we always have combined and will continue to combine
the climate agenda with a moral, ethical, and equity agenda. That's our trademark. And that you came to our conference with this moral undertone gives me a lot of hope. Hope is the theme of the so-called Holy Year in which we are currently in the Vatican. And hope has been spreading here. We will stick to the Anthropocene agenda, which has its forefathers and creators as members of the Pontifical Academy of Science. You have seen a sort of shell of an outcome statement, which we have distributed. Let me tell you what we will do with that. We have carefully listened. Of course, all listening is biased. We have carefully listened to what has been said the last couple of days. So what is not in this draft outcome statement is inspiration, emotion, spiritual undertone. This will come in, I assure you, because that's part of the specificity of our agenda, to combine the technical and science agenda with the spiritual and emotional agenda. Let me elaborate only on this specific aspect of emotions. I think we all agree the complexity of the climate change and climate resilience agenda is difficult to communicate, but I think the world and us get better on that. But there are signs that we lose that battle, because we see lots of backpedaling, even in Europe, on the climate agenda, the investment, the regulation regimes, the turnout of youth on the streets, and so on. It is there, it's backpedaling. So maybe we are not emotional enough in our communication. And that's why the presence of youth here at the conference who brought in emotion was great. I think for me it's very surprising that one of our youth speakers here today on the panel spoke on his children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. I mean, that is touching for me as a grandfather. So that the current youth delegates talk about that. Emotion, we have to combine also with disaster recovery, the resilience when disaster hits. It's then not just technical rebuilding, but dealing with stress, with climate anxiety, with psychological burdens, even epigenetic intergenerational burdens, a health issue. I think we rightly had a lot of attention to health, and Prime Minister, it was good that you highlighted that again in this closing panel. We had emotions a lot related also to the future of the mountains, mountain people, and the existence of mountain landscapes. All of us hiking in mountains hate to see them fall apart and get into troublesome futures. So the loss of emotional attachment when the glaciers go, when the mountains tumble, and lack of political attention to that. There was a statement, the policy of the Alpine Convention is just on paper. At the European level, I think should give us pause and call for action. Similarly, on the coastal resilience issues, we had the call for protection, for conservation, and the call to start from local needs. That's why this conference was so important, to have the voice of mayors, local leaders, because the climate agenda for resilience can only work bottom up, because adaptation is local, mitigation is global. We have to make the adaptation also global, as a global movement. That is the agenda, the hidden agenda or open agenda of what we try with this series of hemispheric conferences, where we bring together folks in the different hemispheres, which we did already. Marcelo, you will elaborate further on that. There are so many differences coming up. When we listen to each other here in the European framework, let me compare that for a moment to what the youth put on their agenda in their closing session in the Africa conference 7 weeks ago. I love the 12 points which you put up here, youth delegates. What did the Africans put first? Jobs, jobs, jobs. Is that surprising in an environment with 50 to 60% unemployment? Are there jobs in it when we transform the economy and the ecology? Well, I think there's scope for dialogue among youth across hemispheres, and we will try to facilitate that. Emotions were, of course, also in the foresight, innovation, and policy science, and in the sustainable land use, water, agriculture, and bioeconomy strategies. You see, I think it became very clear that action has to be on two fronts. One is on the food consumption and dietary choice agenda, and on the building and construction agenda. Being in Vienna, well, maybe we have to say goodbye to the Wiener Schnitzel and think of a well-tasting plant-based schnitzel sooner or later. It's not just the bike passes, but it is how we consume. Would be a role model. Maybe let this leftover schnitzels be very expensive so that the tourists come and consume them. So I'm not that radical. But we have to think about sacrifice. Yes, sacrifice in taste. John, I'm completely committed to your agenda on the construction sector. I think we don't even need to touch the forests for it significantly. If there is a conversion of agriculture together with a dietary change, there is lots of biomass in the cornfields, in the wheat fields, etc. Already now, harvesting half of the corn residues in the US is positive for soil health, rather than plowing it under and making the soil cold and non-transparent for water. So there are win-win situations that are science-based, that bring us forward ecologically and facilitate consumer health and bend the warming curve, hopefully much earlier than in your scenario. The real difference of this conference was the engagement by the youth delegates. It is, I think, not only stimulating but heartwarming, and I think the call was very clear. You want the respect for your knowledge, not for your age. And you got that respect here. I hope you got that feeling. I think the call for your right to a future brings us also to the legal agenda. The legal agenda means that we need to form unusual alliances, not just new alliances, unusual alliances, including with the media, the communications, the faith-based communities, but also with the criminal justice expertise, on which we had only briefly touched here and there. But the right for your future as young people is, I think, an important call to action, as much as it is a call for a right for the future of the ages, the aging population, which suffers ill health and early death in the heat waves. So unusual alliances require that we have a much stronger emphasis on bringing in culture and the arts to move forward. I feel we can leave this conference with a positive perception. You will see a revised document, a statement from the Pontifical Academy of Science and Social Science, which we will work on in the next week. You have a deadline to send us any of your inputs until Monday evening. We want to move fast. And who will be the target of these statements? Each of our conferences ends with such a statement. Well, first of all, the community in the regions, but and also policymakers in Brussels and at national and mayors and governors and science communities levels. But I assure you, these statements are also carefully read in the other regions of the world. That far we have come. There's excitement about this process, which I think, Marcelo, you will lay out in a moment. Let me thank you all for coming. We don't let you lose. You will remain involved, and Marcelo will tell you how and when. Thank you again.
Thank you, Dr. Thank you so much, Dr. Von Braun. And first, great sense of gratitude. Thank you for your engagement. Thank you for coming from near and far to join in the conversation. Just two brief reflections and the journey forward. In the Prado Museum in Madrid hangs a beautiful painting by Goya. Kronos eats its children. Time devours us all. We're all cannibalized by time. Time is running out. Conceptual reflections. The end of civilization as we know it. These are very difficult ideas to wrap our heads around. We're in the great city of Vienna. On my first day being Argentine, not only are we soccer fans, we're also fans of psychoanalysis. There are more psychoanalysts in Argentina than there are patients. Demographers are trying to understand this phenomenon. Seriously. Half an hour from here, this beautiful, majestic venue, a citizen of Vienna that was both nurtured by this beautiful city and also expelled, created the most important socio-emotional architecture for understanding the human person, civilization, and of course, this is with chronos and time. Freud taught the world that children first come to understand the death of their loved ones, maybe the first terror, the first fear in the Freudian project. Freud also came to believe that we are very ambivalent around death, that children first come to see their parents are going to die. This is the first terror. Around death, Freud was very ambivalent about theorizing. What we cannot theorize is planetary death. This is impossible phenomenologically to wrap our heads around. So this is the first reflection. I think it was Dino. Dino, are you with us still? Who spoke beautifully because he said the truth. I'm afraid, we're scared. This is very, very fundamental in the issues we're facing now with just the level of planetary destruction. So that's the first reflection. Time is running out. You saw the anxiety on all the speakers. We're running out of time. We have to keep time. Time is the problem. Then it was our Italian professoressa from Bologna who said it's education. 150 years ago, the great H.G. Wells formulated the problem. We are now in a race between education and catastrophe. So we know after Vienna who's winning that race, but we can't. I'm an educator, and as the professoress noted, it's the most important tool we have. It's education. After Mandela, the most beautiful definition of education is by an Italian pedagogista, the great Loris Malaguzzi. Loris, the father of Reggio Children, the most beautiful initiative on early childhood education, says, what is education? John, he said, it's a nostalgia for the future. We imagine the future and we build a better future for the children. That's education, a nostalgia for the future. So education is the tool for hope and for imagining and building a better future. Vienna is our fourth summit. We started in California, in Sacramento. Of course, Ram Ramanathan is our partner. We had a wonderful summit in California, wonderful summit in the great city of Boston. And it was very clear from the beginning that the Southern Hemisphere had to be at the epicenter of all our endeavors for creating a more humane, a more resilient, a better world. So we went to the Great East African Rift, Kenya, where we had an exquisite summit with our African colleagues. And the Great Rift is very important. Next to the Serengeti, this is where the human journey began. as an adaptation to climate change. So this is very old, it's a very old human endeavor. So Vienna, I'm a teacher, Vienna gets A+ in terms of the engagement, the citizenship with which you all connected and contributed with a good heart, Brazil is next. You're all invited. You can, I think it was one of our colleagues who said, now there's e-learning and e-teaching is magical, fantastic. So you're all invited to the Brasilia Summit. This will be October 2nd. And we will distribute, Matt will make sure we distribute the link for you to just participate and engage. And this is very beautiful and very unique because we are gathering indigenous leaders from the region. There are two critical domains here, the Amazon River Basin and the Congo River Basin. Our attention has to be very, very focused on these two areas. In Brazil, we will have a wonderful set of diverse engagements and presentations with indigenous communities and thought leaders, tribal leaders, most importantly, focus on children. Because with the climate shocks that we're seeing, the ethical dimensions are profound. Those who have the least to do with the creation of all the extraordinary research that Oran and John and Ram and all our colleagues on the science side of the equation, I mean the social science of the algorithm, it's the children, we're robbing the children of their ability to fully flourish. Eudaimonia is the way Plato imagined education for truth, science, and logic, for beauty, aesthetics, and in the Platonic ideal, justice. And this is so profoundly Franciscan. So Brazil, join us. It will be focused on the world of climate resilience from the perspective of youth and children. Then we continue our learnings in India, China, Japan, Oceania, because these are, again,